This funding round has it all. It has Apple potentially investing, Nvidia looking at it. The numbers are just astounding at $100 billion for a private market round. And as you called it, Search GPT, they started positioning themselves for this another gigantic funding round. And also, this is at a time where we saw articles from Ed Zitron and others starting to question, could this ever be a profitable company? What is that actual line to profitability? So I think this is a very, very important funding round. And as you said, not from a purely financial perspective, but more from a big technology strategic perspective. If Apple is actually involved and Apple is now building a tighter connection with OpenAI, I think this could be very interesting. And obviously, when we see can Siri actually work in the upcoming iOS 18 results, and I think this is going to be the relationship between OpenAI and other technology firms. This is potentially going to outline what it looks like for the next few years.
Yes. Oh, can you turn your gain down a tiny bit? Tiny bit. It's coming in a little bit
Yeah.
blown out. Okay. And so you mentioned it that we do have Apple involved in this round potentially. We also have Nvidia potentially involved in this round, and of course Microsoft. So there's like four big players here. There's Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, and Thrive, which is Josh Kushner's venture capital firm. And Thrive is expected to lead this round. Do you read anything into the fact that Microsoft has sort of gone from the big funder to one that might take not necessarily a back seat, but at least the co-pilot seat on this one, to use one of their favorite phrases?
Cheeky there, Alex. I think, well, first of all, I do. Thrive leading the round was very interesting to me because, I haven't seen them making headlines necessarily in the past few years. And only from this announcement did I go back and look that they went from, it was only a billion under management a few years ago to now 14 billion under management, that they just raised a gigantic $5 billion fund last year. So clearly they're ready to deploy it, and seeing the Kushners back in the news in some kind of capacity is always an interesting thing. But yeah, I think this is going to be the Apple connection is the most important one, because it's clear that Microsoft is no longer the investor and partner of an OpenAI, but still does have more specific economic interest than any other company will ever be able to have with them. And all that was outlined in that early $10 billion round back in January 2023. So this company, it just becomes messier and more complicated and more unclear of what is the financial structure. What, this isn't even a traditional cap table. Who is investing and why? I don't know. I think, yeah, it's less clear with all of the news that came out than I think even before the headlines started to leak.
And here's my hot take on Microsoft's position in the funding, and I know nothing about this. I expect Microsoft to be, of those four, the company that puts the least amount of money in, if all four go in. I think this is something that Microsoft understands that it needs to continue to invest in to show adjacency to OpenAI, but is really working hard to build its own AI ecosystem and research house and product organization. And it sees that a lot of this has become commoditized, and therefore it's not going to continue to put the amount of money that it did into OpenAI as it has in the past. Now, there's one other interesting thing that's happened here, which is that Thrive, right? So Thrive Capital, they led the sort of well, it's not really a funding, it's the buyout of employee shares at an $86 billion valuation last year. And now they are going to be, they're said to be leading this one. And there's there's an item in the information that talks about how, this is from Corey Weinberg. He says, these inside rounds usually signal that smart investors are not banging down companies' doors to invest at that price. There are exceptions, of course. Thrive's doubling or tripling down on OpenAI has been raising eyebrows among competitors. The prospect of OpenAI raising billions or trillions more directly from sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East may raise eyebrows even higher, with an important constituency, the U.S. government. So basically, what Corey's saying is like, if you have something like a Thrive going in basically against the grain, buying shares, and then leading the next round, the indication is that the rest of Silicon Valley isn't so eager to put as much money into OpenAI as perhaps OpenAI is seeking. Is this a red flag here?
I think it's definitely a red flag, especially the idea of at a certain point, where do you get more money? When you get into numbers this astronomical, there's still only a somewhat finite capital base that could actually, feed this continued need. And as he said, Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are one of those commonly associated funding sources. And with something sensitive like generative AI, that could be a problem. So I think, but the question around again, buying out employee shares rather than investing more in a company that is losing $5 billion is insane to me. Like, rather than just continued investment into products that can grow and will kind of be that source of revenue that will actually justify these insane valuations. So, yeah, I think it definitely should raise eyebrows. And where else do you go from here? I mean, again, $100 billion valuation as a private company. I think there's ByteDance is somewhere around there or was around there. There's only a very Stripe is one of the only other ones that, and these are in ByteDance and Stripe again are companies with very, very mature revenue products and they're mature businesses, whereas OpenAI is still this crazy bet that does not have any clear path to actually becoming a great business. So yeah, I think it should raise red flags.
Right. So here's a question for you then. Is this a good investment? Like, all right, you could say that Microsoft made a great investment in OpenAI back in the day when OpenAI was pioneering all these new techniques and released ChatGPT, started the generative AI wave. I think we can agree, great money spent by Microsoft. But then you look at some of the numbers, and you mentioned one of them that are coming out around this funding round. So first of all, the information has that OpenAI could lose up to $5 billion this year. This is based off of an information analysis. We also know that ChatGPT, they say that ChatGPT usage has doubled. So now this is the first official new number that we've gotten. That ChatGPT is doing 200 million weekly active users. But we also know that OpenAI spent 100 million. Actually, this might be good numbers. OpenAI spent more than 100 million to build GPT-4. And this year, OpenAI said its revenue was 3.4 billion on an annualized basis. So put that all together. I mean, it does seem like wait, hold on a second. How are they losing 5 billion if GPT-4 only cost 100 million to build? Do you think that's all inference costs? Like, where are they losing this money? Or is it just training the next model?
Yeah, I mean, combination of the actual ongoing compute for every single ChatGPT query, especially for unpaid members of people like non-subscribers using ChatGPT, training
Right.
the next model. I mean, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing, again, around just the overall compute required to operate a service like this. I mean,
Yeah.
every Dolly image you're creating, every API call. So I think that's definitely not unreasonable. It is interesting to me, though, that, I mean, in terms of the way these funding announcements leak, I think is worth bringing up because one thing that happened in the last few years, especially during COVID, especially with these kind of high octane funding rounds, is this idea that the leak happens during the fundraising itself in order to set that target valuation. That once the leak happens and they say $100 billion, in everyone's mind it's $100 billion. Whereas in the past, you know, the news was the funding is done and here's what it was done at. And a lot of the times people protected the valuation of that fundraising round with all of their heart. Like every banker involved, every VC involved would never give up the actual valuation. So I think it's clear that this game of trying to create signaling around where these numbers are in order to drive interest at those numbers is still happening, and I think is never a good sign.
Right. Hmm. Okay, I'm just looking here if there's anything else we want to cover on this. Okay, yeah, yeah. Here's another point. Right. And also, one of the things that I've heard about OpenAI is that they're just not trying to sell anything at a profit now. So basically, they're trying to show that the engagement numbers are going up, that they're entrenched as far as every AI business. And if you're building, they want you building an OpenAI, and they're not really putting profit at the forefront. But again, I think the main issue here is that you're only entitled to a certain percentage of OpenAI's profits. You don't even own part of the company. So like let's say they convert and they become, some sort of traditional structure and you've invested in this nonprofit and then they IPO, you don't even have a stake in that. Like that to
Okay.
me is like, why would you ever want to invest in that unless you're trying to make this strategic bridge like Apple obviously is, like Microsoft has in the past. Maybe Nvidia has some interest there, but the Thrive putting all this money in it and leading the round, I think is really it's an interesting business play. I don't see how it aligns with the traditional AI, the traditional VC investing, unless what it's trying to do is say, hey, we have OpenAI in our portfolio company, and it believes that AI is going to be big enough that that will be sort of like this flagship investment that will attract others. But it's still a lot of money to pay for marketing.
Well, no, you're right that this is the weirdest company in existence. The more we're digging into this, and I'm actually surprised that most of the reporting treats it like a traditional funding round. But remember, this is a company where the fundraising in the past, a lot of was in cloud credits, and then now even you see a lot of it is strategic considerations for an Apple. I mean, Apple can't give them cloud credits. Maybe they'll give them, I don't know, free iPhones or MacBooks or something else. Like, I mean, at every level, this is a company where nothing is normal, nothing is standard or in terms of its structure, and we still know so little about exactly what are the terms of these different deals, what are the terms of whose financial interest lies where. Because again, even that structure of what is it? It's like, yeah, up until a certain percentage of profits that still get capped
49%.
at a certain point. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we know that from I think 2 years ago. So from any subsequent funding round, were there different stipulations? Were there some cloud credits? How much is cash? Yeah, there's remains a lot unknown about OpenAI and its business structure.
Do you think Meta is a threat to ChatGPT? I mean, we talked about in the past about how Mark Zuckerberg saw ChatGPT take off, massive consumer product. He needs to build his own. Of course, he's built his own, and now they've released this Meta AI, which is built on top of their llama model. And this week they put out some numbers with the information. They say it has at least 400 million monthly active users, which is double OpenAI's ChatGPT weekly active, which again is comparing apples to oranges. But there's just the difference, the comparison, and 40 million daily active users. This is according to two current employees, but then Meta had an executive comment. So interesting media strategy there. But 40 million daily active users of Meta AI, which is baked into like almost all of Meta's messaging products. Is that good? I would tend to think it's not.
I think that's actually terrible, and it's clear that that number leaked. Because I got I don't know, do you follow Mark Zuckerberg on Instagram?
Yes,
Because yeah, I got a broadcast channel message. I don't know if you know the broadcast
of course.
channels is something Meta is really trying to push. The idea that you can have like one to many message push from for influencers and creators, and Zuckerberg is one of the more active ones. But basically, he sent a message saying that Llama is growing even faster than I expected, almost 350 million downloads and a 10x jump in monthly usage since the start of the year. So he's pushing this message. And again, we need to separate out Llama from Meta AI. And Meta AI, the only time I've used it is when I've accidentally ended up in it with an Instagram search, and
Same.
it returns results that are worse because I want to actually search on Instagram, and instead it gives me a more half-baked generative AI response. So I am guessing that the Meta AI usage, and you can only imagine on Facebook and the average Facebook user ending up in some weird rabbit hole of generative AI accidentally. So I think the Meta AI side is probably being oversold a little bit. It's still certainly very well positioned when you can start properly baking it into consumer products. But I think llama is the bigger threat to OpenAI. And especially, I mean, in the context of this giant potential funding round, llama is such a brilliant strategic move, and we've talked about it, to go open source and say basically we're not going to charge you for every API call. Here's the model, hosted on your own compute and servers. I think that to the OpenAI business is a much, much bigger threat than Meta AI is to ChatGPT as a consumer product.
Yep, that totally makes sense. But it's also sort of goes to show that this stuff just still has like limited appeal, I think, to consumers. I think mostly because they're just overwhelmed. Like regular people are just overwhelmed in terms of what do I do with this? Like, okay, you can sort of speak with these agents and have like interesting conversations, but people just don't know where to go. And I think in most of them, including Perplexity and and ChatGPT, you're starting to see some of these like prompts that sort of push you towards different activities that you should try to sort of engage with within them. But I do love the one line from the information story after it gives these new updated numbers and has like proud quotes from Meta executives. It says, it's unclear how many people are using Meta AI unintentionally. I'm like, well, yeah.
Well, no,
That's a
as
pretty
we
important caveat, wouldn't you say?
as we said, I mean, and that's the only way I've used it. But I think we got it. We have to distinguish Perplexity from Meta AI, because Perplexity is going after search, and search is a function that we all know how to use and use in our daily lives all the time, versus the Meta AI products, again, have been jammed into where your people regularly do search. And search on social platforms has become huge. Like TikTok, there's been endless coverage that it could be cutting into Google search itself, and it's become the search engine for Gen Z. So I actually was more surprised because, again, when someone searches on Instagram, especially when they're searching more for reels and other content like that, they want an output of a reel or a photo. They don't want a generative AI answer. So it's almost the most backwards way to try to release this kind of product to your consumer base. And I think it's actually bad for the users.
Yeah, it's really weird. Do you think that Meta AI and Threads have kind of a similar feel to them, which is that you sort of get it having seen it work elsewhere, but it still just doesn't really work in the setting that they exist in?
Well, no, the thing I wonder, and I think Zuckerberg is peaking right now, and certainly like the days of just trying to, everyone going after him are a few years past. But I do wonder, these kind of products at a company like that, do they believe they're successful? Are they still sitting there like high-fiving each other saying Threads is a massive success? Because these numbers, 400 million, 100, whatever Threads is it now, 100, or I think they said 200 million monthly active. When you just jam it into a product, that 3.2 billion people use every month, you can get those numbers easily, even with a bad product that is not actually working and will not grow. Even again, on Instagram, every fifth scroll, I get a row of threads that is trying to encourage me to link out to, which if I didn't know what it was, I could very accidentally click on those. So I do think that, yeah, I think it feels similar to Threads in that it's very easy to hit those numbers that seem really big without a product that is necessarily doing great. So I wonder how realistically they actually do evaluate these internally.
Oh, I'm sure they view it with like real science, and they have like so many metrics that we've never heard of before, looking at like the momentum, the acceleration, the retention, all of these things. So, but I do think that they also, like everybody in Silicon Valley, know that you need to hype something a little bit before it's real to make it real, because this is just like network effects on both of these. With Threads, it's like you need people to be posting and then interesting stuff circulating in the timeline. And with Meta AI, you need people to have good experiences with it so that it spreads with word of mouth. And like you're like calling Meta AI into a group chat, which you can
No,
do
no,
if it already
I
does.
I disagree. I think it's actually the opposite, because I think Meta AI does not need network effects. It just needs good output. Because again, the word of mouth, this was cool, this was interesting, is almost not needed. It was needed for ChatGPT, but for Meta, just make it good, make it actually make sense in the product. And when you have that, committed user base, that's all you need to do. So I think actually versus threads, yeah, the pure network effect type product. But I think again, Meta AI has become only more confusing for me as it's been developed. But the llama strategy, I think, is vicious in terms of the whole landscape. The way Zuckerberg and the company have unleashed that on the whole